Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, as always, Stan McCune, realtor right here in the Greenville area. You can find all of my contact information in the show notes if you need to reach out to me for any of your real estate needs. And just a reminder, as always, please like the show on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. Subscribe to it. Make sure you don't miss future episodes. Leave a rating, leave a review, any of those things you can do, I would greatly appreciate to support the show. I'm very excited today that we have a special guest on here, Susan McLarty of Greenville Homeless Alliance. She's the director of Greenville Homeless Alliance and just has a lot of insight. We've talked about the issue of homelessness, which is an issue in our country as a whole. Greenville is no exception to the rule. Obviously, the upstate as a whole, if you go into Pickens, Anderson, Spartanburg, all of the upstate, this is an issue of, but this is a specifically Greenville-oriented podcast. So I connected with Susan a few years ago, and really for a while now, I've been wanting to have her on the show, and then I reached out a few weeks ago, and this has been in the works for a little bit. But Susan, again, director of Greenville Homeless Alliance, thank you for being willing to come on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stan, for having me. I've been looking forward to the opportunity to delve into this with you.
Absolutely. So for the listeners out there who have never heard of Greenville Homeless Alliance, what is it? What are you guys doing? What's your mission? Anything you want to explain about your organization?
Yes, thank you. We like to call ourselves a coalition of doers and change makers, focused specifically on Greenville County. And our vision is that everyone in this community would have access to a safe and affordable home. So I'm sure we'll talk a lot about what that means.
Absolutely.
And then in order to achieve that vision, our mission is that we are a convener, a connector. We are not out there as case managers or care coordinators. We're trying to bring all the big entities that touch this issue together so that we're not working in silos, so that we're leveraging, every penny to meet the needs of the people who are experiencing homelessness and those organizations that are focusing with direct services. But in order to do that, what we say is we're trying to bring both public and private partners together. And when we strengthen those partnerships, we believe it will broaden support overall and increase options. So that big word of increasing options, just like when you're dealing with a client who's looking for a new home in Greenville, you don't want to just show them one, right?
Well, if they will buy the first one, then I'm okay with that. But
you're okay with that?
Normally they do have to look at a few.
Normally, yeah, people like at least, more than one option. But so we're really trying to make more options available, especially for people who are most vulnerable. And they're vulnerable because their income typically is going to be on the lowest end of income. And then so obviously they have to be experiencing homelessness and wanting to seek stability out of that experience.
So if you don't mind, just explain to me a little bit more in terms of what Greenville Homeless Alliance, how you guys are kind of positioned between these public and private entities. What exactly are you guys accomplishing in order to help? Is it cohesion that you're trying to bring, or what exactly, if you could just kind of explain that, how you guys work in the middle of all these different organizations?
Sometimes this is helpful, especially if people are familiar with bicycles and, thinking about the popularity of our Swan Private Trail here. But if you think of that hub in the center of a bicycle wheel with those spokes going out, we are that hub in the center and trying to make that strongest connection possible between, when I say every different type of public and private organization that could be touching this issue, could be obviously local government, to your hospital systems, to your school system, frontline service providers. That's kind of where we started, because they were already providing services. Some of them, when we got started, had been in this community for over 100 years. So does that make sense?
It does. So practically speaking, what does that look like? What would be what would be an example of you guys working with these different organizations and being that spoke of the wheel?
Sure. One of the first early examples that we can now say was made possible by this intentional hub relationship is that we knew that people were being discharged from our local hospitals, but not well enough to return to living on the streets. But yet our shelter providers had to also turn them away because they weren't equipped to care for some of the medical needs. They're just not set up that way.
Right.
And so they had to turn people away, which meant we had this revolving door of, in and out of the hospital and, through the ER, very high public cost when,
Sure.
someone doesn't have a safe place to recover and can, care for their medical needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we have a federally qualified health center partner that comes through. So all their funding comes through our Health and Human Services division of the federal government. And here that's called New Horizon Family Health Services. And they provide health care to anyone in Greenville County who, would be needing it. But they also have a very specific program called Health Care for the Homeless. And because that partner said, hey, I'm aware of other parts of the country that actually provide a special type of bed called medical respite. They started, with our connecting of funders and other partners that led to Miracle Hill Ministries, which is our largest emergency shelter provider, both in Greenville and across the upstate. They said, wow, we knew we were having to turn individuals away. Once they understood what could be done, they actually were able to accommodate this new medical respite program in their current men's and women's shelters without having to build anything new. They just rearranged some space. And so they provided the space and the meals, and everything that comes with that stability of shelter. And then New Horizon came in and provided a nurse and a social worker specific just to the people in the medical respite program. And that's that example of Miracle Hill is 100% private. Your medical side is 100% public, and had, this intentional partnership of the Homeless Alliance existed, likely those.
And so you guys connected them.
And also, they were able to access a small amount of funds from one of our local philanthropy partners. So we talk about this very intentional way of making sure that our best chance to view the problem is to have the most different actors in the community looking at the problem with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it seems like it's a problem that it's like a mountain, and you can't just blow up the whole mountain and make it go away. You have to kind of chisel away one rock at a time. Is that
right?
Does it feel that way on your end?
It does. We also use that analogy of, how do you eat an elephant? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yep.
For sure.
So when people think about Greenville, they think, and I'm just kind of regurgitating some of the things that I hear from people. They think of Greenville as very clean city, a city that is up and coming, already here, has, good diversity, all of these different things. They don't necessarily think about there being homeless people here, because it's maybe not what you see on the news. The news likes to do all these, show every tent city and every, person that is clearly, walking around like we were talking before the show about San Francisco, how much the news media likes to show everyone that's on drugs and, it's just kind of passed out on the side of the road. And we don't see that as much in Greenville as perhaps the media is portraying it in some of these other big cities. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening. And that doesn't mean that obviously we know that there are homeless, quite a few homeless. I actually heard a rumor recently that there's some kind of underground system in Greenville, like underneath, like where Tupelo Honey is. I don't know if this is true at all, but there's like some kind of underground system where there's a bunch of homeless people. You might or might not know that. But anyway, regardless of that rumor, for those who haven't had much experience with the homeless in the Greenville area, how do you quantify the scope of the problem? Do you have any numbers or any comparisons that you can make to kind of, for the average listener, to kind of help them to understand, okay, here is what the homeless problem is?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And we have worked hard on being better able to report and have a shared understanding of that data, because prior to our existence, there was a one-time count that the federal government tells all communities across the country that you should get out and try to count your people experiencing homelessness. Typically, it's that last week of January.
Okay.
So in any part of the country, you may see some news stories around that time that do reference this count. And when you think about that, like, how accurate would your real estate sales be if you said, I'm only reporting one day?
Right. Yeah. Not super accurate. Actually, this is a big problem in real estate, is a lot of the data lags. And so there's only a few companies out there that are really doing a good job with up-to-date data. Otherwise, we're oftentimes looking at data that's 1, 2, 3 months old, which is by that point almost useless.
Yeah. So similar, like, there was a recognition that, first of all, if you saw our data, sometimes it was reported as the entire upstate, because when the federal government looks at where they send their dollars to help us address this problem, they don't just look at Greenville. They have defined areas, and this is called a continuum of care. And the state of South Carolina only has 4.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay.
ours is the largest because we have 13 counties.
Wow.
It spans from as low as Greenwood, over to Cherokee and Oconee, so 13, think of those 13 counties.
Unbelievable.
We're all lumped together. We're all very, very different. Even within Greenville County, it can be very different from Fountain Inn up to Marietta, Slater area.
Yeah.
So we're lumped into that. And so you might see a number that actually is for those 13 counties prior to our existence.
Okay.
So then we said, Greenville has the highest population, our county does, in the entire state. We also have more services here than really anywhere else in the state. And so local philanthropy said, we want to help focus more specifically on Greenville. So when we started talking about that number, and because we get a variety of funding sources to help make our organization possible, we're not tied to what HUD tells us to do. So we talked with the school district and we said, what are you seeing? Because we do have one school district for Greenville County, which is unique as well.
Right. Yep.
Some of our neighboring counties.
I've referenced that a little bit on previous shows. It's like one of the most controversial things about Greenville is whether they should have a bunch of individual school districts or just the one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it helped. Sure. Yeah, for sure. And so the other thing we've tried to help people understand is, when you do hear that one night count, they're not typically including most of our school children, because they're only able to, in terms of how HUD looks at the issue and their definition, there's different definitions, and theirs is more literal. Are you living on the street? Are you living in your car? Are you living in currently in an emergency shelter? Okay, if you're in those situations, you're going to be counted. But if you're paying for your own motel room but don't have, home, they don't count you as experiencing homelessness under that HUD definition.
Interesting.
If I've lost my home and I've said, Stan, can my family and I stay with you for a short period of time? That's called couch surfing sometimes, or doubling up. That's also not counted. And so thankfully in Greenville, we have very, very low numbers of children and their families who are self-reporting literal street homelessness. So I think, to your point earlier about other cities, we just aren't seeing that here. But under our broader definition, so we follow what the U.S. Department of Education outlines homelessness to be. We do have, in the most recent school year, 2,381 children whose family self-reported homelessness. So that
Wow.
number would be much bigger if you could include parents and non-school age children that might be in the home as well.
Sure. So, so that's interesting. So what's the reason why Greenville has less street homelessness perhaps than some other areas might per capita?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We think one is because we have the most number of shelter beds here.
Hmm.
We have over 450 shelter beds. And we're kind of adding some capacity there.
Okay.
And that's way more than any other county in the
Interesting.
state.
How does that compare to like other? I know that you guys have looked at other metro areas as well. How does that compare to other metro areas?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have that data. We've studied other cities as close by as Charlotte,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say for our population, and most of our emergency shelter beds currently are inside the city limits of Greenville,
Okay.
which for your listeners, is quite small geographically
Right.
compared to the size of the county. But I think per capita, if you were just to say our city, like we would still rank pretty high in terms of, to the population, the total
Okay.
population.
Interesting. So how does you say it would rank kind of high? So you've compared to like Charlotte and whatnot. I mean, what are we doing different than, for instance, a Charlotte, or what have you learned from seeing some of these other areas that could be improved in Greenville?
So one reason we formed the Homeless Alliance is we did have this recognition. And when I say we, it was among those big service providers who, like I mentioned, the one who had been here by the time we were forming was the Salvation Army of Greenville County, over 100 years. Miracle Hill, over 85 years. So like these United Ministries, where I'm coming to you today from, over 50 years. So these partners who said something has changed and we need to do something different, because otherwise the people we're trying to serve are going to end up more harmed than helped. And so what they landed on, like the housing, was so elusive. It used to be more plentiful, especially if you look at where our shelter and nonprofit partners, where their offices are. Again, for our listeners who may not be as familiar with Greenville, a lot of these are located closer to where our mills resided at one time. So our textile economy created a plethora of rental housing that for a long, long time was quite affordable and walkable.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
closer to other,
Yeah,
amenities.
those little mill towns. Yeah, they're you can walk straight to the mill, and yeah, you can envision just how how thriving that was at one point. People not even needing even a vehicle. That's why it's so hard to drive around those areas.
Right. And some of the streets are very narrow. So really, we said, we've got to figure out how to help more people understand what's now very difficult, because we have a lot of residents who care deeply about these nonprofits, but they may not know how to help create these long permanent solutions that are now so difficult to find. And the other piece that comes with that is, like, usually with homelessness, you're not just experiencing the lack of housing. You may have had a ding on your credit. You may have experienced an eviction. You may also have, like you said, like, what if you don't have a car? Like, that really limits where you can look for
Mm-hmm.
housing.
Yep.
So all those pieces together, we've tried to bring in a stronger partnership with GreenLink, our public transit partner, and they're funded by the city and the county here. And then a lot of work with trying to figure out what are those ways that we're going to have to figure out to build more housing that truly meets the needs and the income levels where we see people just have no options.
Yeah, and that's something that we've talked about a lot here on this show, because affordable housing, workforce housing, all of those things, a lot of buzzwords, and we've got my episode. My most recent episode of the show was about the local political scene, And of course, we've got mayor races and city council races all over the upstate. So what would be, if anyone running in those elections are listening to this, what would you say to them with regard to these affordable housing shortages? What can public officials be doing to help on that front?
First and foremost, just making sure we're all talking off like the same sheet of music. It is a complex issue in that, there's different ways to build and fund to maintain quality housing. So I do think we've got some sort of misinformation that often just, unfortunately hurts that narrative of where we need to be going as a community.
What would be, if you don't mind, what would be an example of that misinformation?
Yeah, so I think sometimes currently there's some discussion as recently as last night around what does this tax abatement look like and mean
Right.
for residents, especially in Greenville County. And
you're saying for residents or for the developers that are getting like tax refunds for affordable developments?
No, I'm sorry so for our elected officials, I think there's misinformation both on what I would call the residents, the voter side, but also some misinformation that's coming from some of our elected officials as well, that just amplifies a narrative, that is not helpful to people that truly are desperate for somewhere to call home.
Sure.
So I think what often is misunderstood is housing is expensive to build. It's gone up during COVID, construction cost, construction labor, all those market forces have impacted interest rates, all those things are outside of our control. So in order to build quality housing, it looks the same, but the way to make it affordable is you've got to figure out ways to layer more money in there to bring that rent down, to bring down the cost of habitat home. And so that is, the only way that we're going to match. Again, it's not that people aren't working, people have jobs, their income just is lower than where the market offers that housing.
Right.
So in order to help people leave homelessness, like we've got to be, finding ways to stack capital and bring that cost down so that person pays what any of us, that gets to the definition of affordable. We should be all paying around 30% of our gross income or less for our housing cost. So like, could your clients, buy a home that's 50% of their gross income? Would the bank give them a loan?
It depends. It depends on how they're reporting that income, but they're not supposed to.
Right, they're not supposed to. So that's also true in the rental market. You're not really supposed to. Like a lot of times when you go to rent, you have to show you earn 3 times the rent.
Yep.
Right. Well, there's a lot of private property owners out there that are not adhering to that. So we have a lot of residents in Greenville County. We even have like 32,000 households, Stan, who are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing.
Wow.
32,000. So we look at that as like, that's 32,000 households that at any moment could fall into this crisis.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we think it's surprising our numbers aren't higher.
Right. Yeah. And is that 32,000? Is that just in the city limits, or is
that's Greenville County?
That's Greenville County. Okay. Because I was gonna say the city only has 75,000. So
right.
I don't remember. I haven't looked at the most recent numbers, but it was like I'm not relieved from the county standpoint, but I'm like, well, at least that's not the city. That would be really bad for the city. So would you say that are the solutions keeping up? The solutions for homelessness and the various public-private work that's being done, the various charities that are contributing, all of these things, are they keeping up with the demand, or is the homeless problem getting worse? Is it growing at a rate that we're really struggling to keep up with it in the Greenville area?
That gets it back to how the data we have access to is one piece of your questions. We do know year after year, when we look at the school district numbers, because they're able to report each school year, and the numbers start over the beginning of the school year, that number has been dramatically rising. So we are not going in the right direction for our children and their families. But like we talked about earlier, majority of those children and their families are not going to qualify for the federal resources we do have to address. We have to wait for them to fall into finding a bed in an emergency shelter or finding themselves literally on the street, which is not really a good long-term solution.
No, that's for sure.
For your future workforce, they also, there's a statistic out there that says every time a child has to move due to housing instability, they can lose on average 6 months of learning. And what we see too is it's not just one move in a school year, it's usually 4 or 5. And you could see why that becomes difficult then to keep up and graduate even from high school if you have that housing.
That probably just perpetuates the cycle.
Exactly.
And then they're more likely to be not as educated as the median, student, and then they become an adult, and then they're already starting behind the 8 ball.
Right. So the other part that's hard to keep up with, while we are making progress, and I'm glad I'm going to listen to your episode about the most recent, our election coming up in November. So that's the good news. We've done a ton of advocacy and alongside others, and we have seen our local government here in the city of Greenville use our own tax dollars to help make more housing come online. And so that's a really critical piece of we can't just hope that somebody else is going to solve our problem.
Yeah.
That's, if Greenville had waited for that to happen, we wouldn't have the beautiful city we have today. So, that's good that we're doing it. We're still not doing it at the rate that the consultants who helped us look at the problem said we should be, but they're trying to get there.
So the current goal is what needs to be done for us to get there? What are those numbers of units or however you look at it that we need to get to in order to reach the goals that you would have?
There is a strategy that's been put out by the Greenville Housing Fund. So they are the entity that is looking more alongside Greenville Housing Redevelopment Authority. So between those two, they're really looking at the housing situation across the entire county. And they've said in order to get to the goal, which would reduce our shortage by a half, is we need 10 million from each local government entity per year after year, to drive that number in half.
10 million what? If you could just
10
clarify.
Million in a local revenue, 10 million from the city, from our city general operating budget. 10 million.
To go towards what specifically?
That goes into a fund. If it's a city, it goes into the Greenville Housing Fund, who holds those dollars, and they become, in some cases, the last gap of funding to help a deal pencil. So when we were talking about the tax abatement, that's one way that, when you're trying to bring down the cost to the consumer, being someone trying, in this case, to exit homelessness, you got to find different kinds of capital in order to do that. So they don't give all 10 million to one partner. It might be a recent example could be 500,000 was what that developer needed to close that gap to get the bank to, agree for them to do this housing development.
Yep.
So they're called that last gap funder. And sometimes they're the first to be paid back. So we're also trying, where possible, to recycle dollars. So then it's there to help the next project that can't pencil. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know how much you run into this, but one thing that I talk a lot about on this show is NIMBYism. not people that do not want development to be in their backyard. NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. And so obviously we see it all the time that when a developer comes in, more and more there's pressure, and rightfully so, for those developers to include affordable units. We, you know, I talked about, again, last episode, about people need to start being more aware of the term AMI, area median income, that developers are going to be forced to have, you know, units that are for affordable for people that are 80% AMI, 70%, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot of, because of this anti-development sentiment that's in the Greenville area, people don't want any, people are just like, Greenville's growing too fast. We need to stop all developments. Out in Easley and Pickens County, there's people threatening, if I get into office, I will do a 6-month moratorium on all developments, which is not good for housing affordability just in general. But what are your thoughts on that? What would be what's your pitch to someone that's kind of anti-development? They don't want to see, they just want developers to stop getting these tax rebates. They aren't happy about, you know, hearing these affordable units coming in and being subsidized by the government, because they feel like that's their tax dollars going towards making a city grow beyond what they want it to grow as. What would be your pitch to them? What would you say to them?
Well, we've spoken up for some of those exact situations, and our pitch has been, you know, do you believe that everyone should have the opportunity to enjoy this beautiful place that we like to call home? And if you believe that, then, you know, you're going to have to look for some of the best ways for us to find solutions that possibly, like, we spoke for one called Renaissance Place, and we were the only voice of support. And, you know, it's right there, not far from Bob Jones University, so close to grocery stores, very close to the bus line. And, you know, that has been a wonderful opportunity. It's for seniors. They have to be 55 or older to live there. And it's just quality housing that's right, you know, in a great part of our city. It's actually right on the city county line. And, you know, we're just like, I wanted to be welcomed. I moved here in 1992, fresh out of college, to work for Milliken and Company. And, you know, I wanted to be welcomed. I didn't want somebody to go, you're going to have to, you know, commute from Clinton or
Right.
somewhere, you know,
Sure,
way far out. So I that's our best argument, is like, how would you want to be treated? And if you care about this community, then, you know, we're going to challenge you that there's many jobs that are not paying, you know, a person or a household enough as well to live close to where they work. So it could be that burger that you love, you know, that restaurant may go out of business because they can't find employees now who
yep,
can afford to either park in a garage or drive, you know, that far to work, or their car breaks down, you know, and they can't make it to work. I mean, there's just so many factors of, like, if you can have this diverse incomes, it's actually the most healthy way a community can thrive, and it, you know, people can have access to employment, and then from there they have other opportunities. But you can't get them here.
you're right.
They
Yeah,
can't work.
an area is either growing or it's stagnating, in my opinion. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that. They think we can just stay the same, but you can't just stay the same. It just doesn't work that way.
Right. So yeah, no. The other thing I would say is, like, we do think you have to be smart about where the best places to build are, especially in our county that's so big and has a lot of diversity in opportunities where land still exists. You know, I think 2/3 of Greenville County is not zoned.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we would say it's better right now to build closer to where we do have infrastructure like
Sure.
water and sewer.
Yep.
So, there's just things like that. We're part of other coalitions that are looking at what's the best way to use the land. And we work with partners like Upstate Forever and that coalition. We also, what is the opportunity with our GreenLink system? How can we help make sure housing that we could build near those existing routes gets developed to help serve, especially people whose income really is going to rely on that affordable transportation option. It's just
Yeah.
got it takes a lot of intentionality and planning ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Did Greenville Homeless Alliance have any input in like the very controversial Project Woven? Were you guys involved with that at all, or what? How did that come about?
Yeah. So we did attend a lot of those public meetings, and we do encourage those who are part of our coalition to also, if they're able to be a part of those public meetings, to give comment, to be aware. I think that is a good example of where the county's new tax abatement policy made a difference and helped increase the number of affordable options in that new development.
And that was
And
they included several at 80% AMI, right? Is that what that one was, if I remember correctly?
the before they got the approval for the new tax abatement, they did have a few, but so it increased even further. And that now they've got some at 80, some at 60, and some down at 40%
Okay,
of the
great.
area median income. Yeah. So we think, that's also a smart way we haven't touched on yet is like we really can be a healthier community when you mix different incomes
Mm-hmm.
with each
Mm-hmm.
other. And
Yeah.
so that does that. They also have some space for entrepreneurs that's built into Woven that we, I think see that partners like Mill Village Ministries can help, you know, um, through what they're incubating, give people then that permanent space to be the entrepreneur and grow their own business. And, that's a great way for someone to be more successful in today's economy.
And I
And
should
we hope
probably
we can.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I
No.
should probably mention for those that don't know. I just kind of threw Woven out there. Woven is kind of a um, I guess it would be considered kind of a mixed use, but heavily residential on the west side of Greenville. I believe not too far from Unity Park, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yeah.
Development that is basically mixed market rate and mixed affordable housing. For those that aren't familiar with it. So sorry to interrupt you, but I
Yeah.
realized
Yeah.
in the middle of that like some people probably have no idea what that is. So
Yeah. I think still what's hard, and you were touching on it a little bit earlier, is the the breadth of the affordable equation continues to grow. So like our area median income is continuing to rise. And where Woven sits is a historically Black neighborhood. And so the neighbors that we heard come and speak, many of them said that this is including affordable, but it's not affordable for what I need or what my
mm-hmm.
parents need now that
Right,
they've aged out of their home. So
sure.
that's kind of some of the hard conversations because
That even with affordable housing and workforce housing, that gentrification still happens.
it is, and we with the Homeless Alliance are also focused in at 30% and below the area median income, and it kind of just comes back to like 75% of the people who make that choice to enter our emergency shelters have zero income.
Yep.
So you're not going to go from like 0 to 70,000 gross annual income
Right.
immediately. So that all takes time, and you have to have that housing stability in order to be, to have the ability to work.
So is kind of like you get those people with that are not making any money. The first job is just to get them into a shelter, or perhaps maybe to get them a housing voucher where they can rent and start to get income history, and then is the next step to potentially get them into some of these you become a homeowner in an affordable unit or perhaps a habitat home or something like that? Like, is that kind of the goal when someone has no income? Or do you
So
guys think of
every
it in
person,
like a different way?
yeah. I would say like when we try to think about a person-centered approach and recognizing that that person is best like their own goals for themselves, and what hopefully we can do is as a collection of service providers come around them to help pull those barriers out of the way to let them reach those goals. So it's hard to say. I would say like related to the housing voucher, there's a small handful of vouchers that it's almost nearly impossible to make that resource match up with
Okay.
someone who's in a shelter. So that is that's because the federal government is really sending those, here, and it's hard to get more. So,
Yep. Understandably.
but in terms of work, um, there's a lot of partnerships that help people. Maybe they have always had a goal to, do something that they haven't had the ability to have that support and training to gain that skill. And so sometimes while people are in shelter, they may be working also with a coach through United Ministries with their Striving to Thrive model, and helping people, okay, what can we do to help you gain those skills so that when you are ready to exit, your income is higher and your likelihood of being able to afford all the different components to remain stable are available to you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So what we hear though is like there's such a strong desire to work once people gain that kind of they're in shelter, they're feeling like more stable, safe, that they could just walk down Main Street, and they do that, and they come back with a job in one of our local restaurants or even a national chain. And unfortunately, it's really hard then to match the housing
Right.
with that income and keep them close enough to that place they've taken the job with.
And I've
Does that
seen
make
some
sense?
instances with people with vouchers that they get a job and now they don't, now their voucher, the value of their voucher has gone down. Perhaps, you know, they're in a different income bracket. So now they don't qualify for as high of a housing voucher. So now, even though they're making more money, they're now also having to spend more money in order to rent because now they have a copay that they're having to pay in addition to their vouchers. So that's like a whole separate, you know, issue where sometimes people are disincentivized to make income based on how that social safety net system is structured.
Right, right. And all those different pieces of that net don't line up at the same income.
Mm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I do think, if your listeners aren't familiar with the work of United Ministries, they are doing an incredible job with some new software that helps people look at like, am I approaching that? And if so, like I might lose, my ability to cover childcare, and so it just helps instead of just finding out after the fact, which is
Right.
how it happens for most people today, sends you into that crisis. So they're really working to get more proactive,
Interesting.
which is great. Which
So
is
they
great. Yeah.
are they is that a standalone charity or are they affiliated with anyone?
They're a standalone nonprofit.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. We'll definitely have to if you could send me a link to them, I can link to them in the show notes. I'll also link to Greenville
Absolutely.
Homeless Alliance as well. And anyone that you want me to link to, I'll link to in the show notes. Um
Yeah. We like to give
so
them a shout out too, because they give us office space and treat us like employees, which is helpful with this new way of working that we're doing, which is a little harder to find grants to cover because we're not providing those direct services.
sure.
So we're located here in their administrative building.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we only have a few minutes left, and you've been very generous with your time, so I appreciate that. So I just a few quick questions here, and then we'll let you go. What would you say are perhaps some misconceptions that people have about homeless people in general?
There's a lot out there. So I'll just give a quick plug. We have some Mythbusters that you maybe could also link in the show notes,
Okay,
some
yeah, for
short
sure.
videos that if people are interested, they can watch those. And one of the misconceptions is maybe that, people don't want to work, or, are choosing to remain homeless. And I think, what we hear so often is like, if they had a choice, if they had an option, they wouldn't be choosing this.
Right.
It's we don't have the choices.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Or if you said to me, you can stay here or, give up 95% of your income to have that roof over your head, what choice would you choose?
Right. Yeah, it's not quite as simple and straightforward as you might think.
Right. But definitely the Mythbuster. We also hear a lot of people ask about panhandling. We have one that addresses that as well.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing I've, there are sometimes that we'll see, people on the side of the road, asking for money or, or for food or whatever the case may be. And I've talked to my children about it sometimes, that it's like, these aren't people who don't want to work. They're working harder in a lot of ways than me. Like on the side of the road, like in the cold weather and whatnot, like out there, that's work. It's just, for some reason, they are in this position that they're in. We don't know why. It could be education. It could be, perhaps some kind of substance abuse. It could be a lot of different things. But that's one thing that I hear a lot, is that it's like, well, these people just don't want to work. And it's like, if you actually look at a lot of the people that are street homeless, they're working oftentimes harder than us, quite frankly. But it's just not in a conventional job. And, if we could get that level of work ethic and channel in the right direction, they could benefit themselves, but also benefit everyone else, in the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What, so let's say that, that, I don't know if there will be anyone listening to the show that would potentially be in a situation where they might find themselves homeless, but we have to operate under the assumption that there might be. So if someone is in that situation, what's the first thing that they should do?
We have some great tools on our website. Again, things that didn't exist before we were created. So we have a Get Help page. And on that, there's some very simple tools. If you need emergency shelter, we try to make it very easy. We also just recently added a different tab under our resource page that's you can use filters. So the intent there was to try to help you more quickly understand what, based on my situation, is the best fit for me. Because it can be a little bit overwhelming because we have so many resources here in Greenville County. Yep. So you start applying the filters and it takes you more quickly, and then you can see from there the number to call, the address, the website. You just click, And so we also encourage people to be familiar with that yourself, so that if someone asks you, we have things on that page that if someone is hungry, you can eat really 7 days a week in Greenville. If make sure you can get there. But a lot of people that are panhandling are very close to these locations.
Okay.
And so just educating yourself, saying, the best thing that we can do is direct you to the experts. Anything that I, could give as a regular everyday resident is probably what we would call a Band-Aid, and may just continue to keep that person more in that state of crisis. What we want them to do is move out of that state of crisis and get stable, be contributing parts of our community, and have all those, benefits that we enjoy.
Absolutely. So, practically speaking, what can the average listener on here who is in a home and it desires to help with the homeless situation in Greenville, or perhaps even outside of Greenville, but this is a Greenville show, so practically what can people do to contribute towards solving this problem?
Well, we would first invite everyone to sign up to get our e-communication. So we only send 2 things a month. And outside of that, we might every so often send what we call a call to action alert. And that is one way we're trying to mobilize people to help show up and maybe be the yes in my backyard and combat what typically is always going to show up, the no in my backyard, right? So we won't.
We're a big, this show is a big YIMBY supporter. Yes, in my
We'd love
backyard.
to have more support of that. It
Yes.
truly takes a lot of voices to convince the policymakers. And so sign up for that. And then we feature a lot of the partners who, we would encourage you, if you're living in housing that's affordable, that means you probably should have some extra income available. And that's always welcome. Money solves problems, Stan.
That's right. Absolutely.
So
you
can choose.
I've seen on the Greenville Homeless Alliance page, there's a donate button that people can click, and I assume it's pretty straightforward in terms of donating on there.
It is. And currently, depending on how soon this airs, we have our one time a year event where we, have a luncheon on November the 14th. It's during the National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And that's a way you could be a sponsor, join us for that. And those dollars are going to help ensure that we keep this entity of the Alliance going. And this year, we're actually having a fun nighttime event. And it's kicking off a 6-month art exhibit.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be right off of Main Street.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll definitely have to look into that.
Yeah. But just educating yourself, educating those who in your circle of influence is also as important as those financial dollars.
Yeah, 100%. So, last question, because this is a little bit more sobering episode. Obviously, we're talking about a major problem: children not in homes, people out on the street. But to end on a positive note, what are some of the things in the future that have you excited, that we are contributing towards getting more people off the streets or out of motels that they can't afford and into homes? What are some of the things that have you excited?
Thank you for that question. We are very excited that we are undertaking the second largest public art commission mural in the city of Greenville.
Oh, wow. Where's that going to be?
And it's on the back of Trying Mercy Center Sanctuary. So if you're familiar with Stone Avenue, about 14,000 cars or vehicles per day travel just in that one direction towards this future mural.
Yeah, I go through that area all the time.
Yeah, so pretty soon you'll see a boom lift on site, and we've got a local artist creating this mural that depicts stories of hope. And our hope is that more people become curious about what are those stories of hope? What did it take? It'll hopefully dispel some of those myths, but we know the solutions to homelessness. We truly believe we just need more people to join us in creating those solutions. And so, those 14,000 per day, we hope are just little seeds that get planted that turn into, blossoming flowers, trees, things to come for Greenville that makes it such a better place for the long term. So that's really exciting to us. And the people that are featured in there also, like, tears came to their eyes when they knew that they've been chosen to be the face of trying to bring hope. They've come out of such dark, difficult circumstances.
Sure.
And now, so it's really meaningful to us that we can lift up that and that they're willing to share that experience. So as that comes to completion, we are also launching in November what we're calling the GVL, so Greenville Ignite Fund. So stay tuned to hear about that, but we want to work with housing providers and just figure out what can we do to help it make it easy as possible to house our most vulnerable residents. We want it to be win-win so that, again, our community becomes a place where everyone has that access. So that is exciting. It brings us a lot of hope.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I love all of that.
So it's solvable. That's what people should know.
Yes. It's solvable. it takes more than just you and a few city officials. It takes, I know it's cliche, but it does take all of us, at the end of the day. And so that's why I wanted to get this episode out. I have a lot of other people that I want to interview, but I really wanted to get this out because I just felt like the sooner people kind of understand why affordable housing is important, and understanding that just because they're not seeing these tent cities everywhere doesn't mean that there isn't a problem, and that doesn't mean that we can just ignore it and just coast and just it'll solve itself. It's not going to solve itself, and that as much as anyone. And so thank you so much for what you're doing, and any of your partners or affiliated organizations that might be listening. If you're listening, thank you to all of y'all as well, because it like I said, it benefits all of us when people have a safe roof over their heads. That
it truly
is
does.
the best thing for the entire city, for the county, for the upstate as a whole.
It does. And we know that it's not like we have data. We could go on, I know, for longer, but there is data to show most of those people we've talked about today, their last permanent address was right here. So it's a homegrown issue.
Yep.
That it's going to take a homegrown response.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that most of the homeless in our area are not coming here from another area.
Yeah.
I do want to ask one follow-up, and then I promise I'll let you go.
Okay. This is a big topic of discussion. So.
It is. So those people, are they getting priced out? What is the reason for that happening?
Yes. We hear almost daily from people who have done nothing wrong, but maybe, they have been a long-term renter, and their person there, or entity they're renting from, has decided it's time to sell, and they might get a 30-day notice, and It's virtually impossible to find, especially if you've been a long-term renter and they haven't increased your rent dramatically over that time. You're going to be shocked with what market rate rent is. And so it's really, really tough. So that's that is what's happening. And if someone does move here thinking it's going to be better in Greenville than it was where they came from, United Ministries, where we are located, if they get here and realize, what, this didn't work out for me and I really need to get back, they work with people to arrange transportation back to where, that family and other resources exist, so that people can not be trapped here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was all great, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Send me whatever links you want me to include in the show notes, and I'll put them in there.
Okay.
But if people want to get a hold of you, or want to get a hold of Greenville Homeless Alliance or whatever, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, on our website we have a tab with the connect with us,
and we just ask what is the URL for your website?
It is GVL Homes with the S, the number 4 followed by the word all. So it should sound like GreenvilleHomesForAll.org, but we shorten it to GVL.
Perfect. And like I said, we'll put that in the show notes as well. GVL Homes 4 number 4 all.org.
Correct.
So perfect. Yeah, I've got it pulled up here, and I see the connect. There's all sorts of things on here. So be sure, if you're listening, be sure to check out the GVL Homes for All, GVL Homes for All.org website. At the very least, look at that. We'll link to a few other things in the show notes, and we're just hoping to get people into homes, reduce the homeless problem in Greenville, and I'm just grateful that there's people like you on the front lines of that, to be able to, for those of us that are passionate about it, but maybe are not able for whatever reasons to be on the front line, we can support people like you who are on the front lines, and I'm just very grateful for that.
Thank you. Well, I'm really grateful for our partners that, help us in terms of day in, day out, meet people who are in true crisis. So they inspire me and give us a lot of hope about what's possible for this community.
Absolutely. Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you to our listeners for listening. As always, you can find all of my contact information in the show notes, along with the links that Susan's going to be sending me. If you like this show, please subscribe, like, rate, review, all of those good things. And we will talk again next time.